This is Deborah Taveras with StopTheCrime.net. And the talk today is about global water wars and also the water wars that we're experiencing here in the United States. We're going to be talking about specific attempts here in Northern California to privatize the water and reduce our water availability by the engineered drought that we're facing, that has been engineered. The name of the talk is USA Inc., Stealing Water for Profits and Power, Creating Water Markets from a Natural Energy Resource. The wars of the 21st century will be fought over water rather than oil, as in the past. This is in memory of Dr. Stan Monteith, who hosted Radio Liberty for over 20 years. And he always begun his radio program with this quote, "Bringing you the story behind the story, the news behind the news, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at and illusion is usually king. But in the battle for the survival of Western civilization, it will be reality and not illusion or delusion that will determine what the future will bring." And Dr. Stan passed away September 29th of 2014. I also have a quote from former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Quote, "The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to the realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could espouse a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent." Again, this is J. Edgar Hoover, former director of the FBI, and this was a quote that came out of the Elks magazine in August of 1956. The presentation today about water wars will demonstrate and expose with documents the plans that intend to create greater enslavement by weaponizing water. And that's only if we consent. The topics that we'll cover: why do politicians, policies, and governments make no sense? Covert documents never intended to be released for publication will be discussed. And we will reveal the truth behind the reality of available primary water created by Earth's energy, and it is a renewable. This is very good news. This is one of the best pieces of good news that I've been able to share in a very long time. We'll also be talking about documents that will reveal and expose the newest strategy for driving public water resources into private hands of the World Bank and other corporate players. And the conclusion is going to be about sharing this information and the resource material here with everyone you know, and download Lawfully Yours. This is a people's empowerment guide to our corporate commercial legal system. You can download Lawfully Yours from the top of StopTheCrime.net. It is a compilation of ex-federal judges on how our system really works and how we can not consent lawfully. A reminder of some other quotes that were given to us as warnings throughout history, and certainly many of you remember. This is just a partial quote from John F. Kennedy. "For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence. The high office of president has been used to foment a plot to destroy American freedom, and before I leave office, I must inform the citizens of this plight." These are two warnings combined together, and I would encourage you to pay attention to those words of warning. Also, from the Silent Weapons, Quiet Wars document, this is an extremely important quote. All science is merely a means to an end. The means is knowledge. The end is control. Beyond this remains only one issue: who will be the beneficiary? Again, this is from Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Now, to say that we have been massively deceived is an understatement. We've been deceived by doublespeak and by the Delphi technique and many other brainwashing techniques, and certainly through our education system and massive media. And we've certainly all been targeted with massive amounts of chemicals and toxins. So we have a lot to deal with. We're going to talk about what we can deal with, how we cannot consent, and what you need to know to understand your current reality so you can function best within it. I found it very interesting. Part of the deception is language. And you'll see here what the word defined in Latin for conspiracy really means. It's con plus spire from Latin. It means to breathe together. And sadly, we have allowed the controllers to breathe for us. They've interpreted and reinvented the meaning of conspiracy. They've stolen our breath, and we must reclaim it. Because secret conspiracy or to conspire means death, and open conspiracy or conspire is life. And we're in a battle for the preservation of all living on this planet. We also need to honor James Traficant. He was a former Ohio congressman, and he passed away just a few days after Dr. Stan Monteith passed away. James Traficant was on his farm in Ohio and met with a tractor accident while in his barn. It apparently, as the story goes, flipped over, and he subsequently died. But what is most important to remember Jim Traficant by is what he said to the House of Representatives on March 17th of 1993. And this is only in part, and you can go to stopthecrime.net or just type into your search engine James Traficant, Traficant, address to the House, so that you can see the full address that he made, again, on March 17th of 1993. And this is just part of what he said. It is an established fact that the United States federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act of March 9th, 1933. The receivers of the United States bankruptcy are the international bankers via the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. All United States offices, officials, and departments are now operating within a de facto status in name only, under emergency war powers, with the constitutional Republican form of government now dissolved. In 1933, the federal United States hypothecated all of the present and future properties, assets, and labor of their subjects, all of us, the 14th Amendment, the U.S. citizen, to the Federal Reserve System. We are reaping what has been sown, and the results of our harvest is a painful bankruptcy and a foreclosure on American property, precious liberties, and a way of life. Few of our elected representatives in Washington, D.C. have dared to tell us the truth. The federal United States is bankrupt. Our children will inherit this unpayable debt and the tyranny to enforce paying it. America has been completely bankrupt in world leadership, financial credit, and its reputation for courage, vision, and human rights. This is an undeclared economic bankruptcy, and economic slavery of the most corrupt order. United States Congressional Record, March 17, 1993, Volume 33, page H 13-9. What is important to understand is what happened to James Traficant during this period of time that he was trying to warn all of us of how government really works. He was imprisoned over trumped-up charges. He was in federal penitentiary for about 7 years, and while Bush was going to pardon him, he did not want a pardon for something he did not do, so he served his time. He was nearly murdered while in prison. This is another document. Again, you will find all these documents on stopthecrime.net under USA Inc. link. This is called the Clearfield Doctrine. And what is most important about the Clearfield Doctrine is that when private commercial paper, or our debt notes, as the United States has had since 1913, since the Federal Reserve, since the debt notes have been used, the United States sovereignty no longer existed. We lost our sovereignty status, and we have become no different than mere private corporation. That is why we are USA Inc. This is an extremely important report. I would recommend everyone download it. You can certainly watch the YouTube documentary, but this is actually quotations from the Iron Mountain Report. Now, a little background about the Iron Mountain Report. It was developed in the early 60s by experts that met in a facility, a nuclear facility called Iron Mountain. That's why the report became known as the Iron Mountain Report. And the report from the Iron Mountain was to determine the minimum and optimum levels of destruction of life, property, natural resources, on the possibility and desirability of peace. Now again, we've been tricked by doublespeak and by language. The word peace does not mean peace as we would define peace to be. Peace are war games. Peace is war. War is peace. And it's important to understand what the RAND Corporation has to say and did tell us about war games. On page 5 of the Iron Mountain Report, I have some segments that I've pulled out, and I'm just going to read these to you now because these tie in to our energy resources and to water. Page 5, they talk about how they organized repression of minority groups, the reestablishment of slavery, the deliberate intensification of air and water pollution as part of a program leading to peace, the long-range planning and budgeting of the optimum number of lives to be destroyed annually in overt warfare is high in the Iron Mountain Group's list of priorities for government action. Page 18. Because of the unusual circumstances of the Iron Mountain Report, the Iron Mountain Group viewed the nature of its findings. They did not recommend that the report be released for publication. They said that it was their judgment that such action would not be in the public interest. The uncertain advantages of the public discussion of our conclusions and recommendations are, in our opinion, greatly outweighed by the clear and predictable danger of a crisis in public confidence with uncertainty and untimely publication of this report, which might be expected to provoke. Some other quotes on page 69. We propose the establishment under executive order of the President of a permanent war peace research agency empowered and mandated to execute the program's described goals. This agency will be provided with non-accountable funds sufficient to implement its responsibilities and decisions at its own discretion. Will have authority to preempt and utilize without restriction any and all facilities of the executive branch of government in pursuit of its objectives. Will be organized along the lines of the National Security Council. Will be responsible solely to the President or other officers of government temporarily deputized by him. Operations will be governed entirely by its own rules of procedure. Its authority will expressly include the unlimited right to withhold information on its activities and its decisions from anyone except the President whenever it deems such secrecy to be of public interest. So when you consider why governments, policies, and politicians make no sense at all, you have to take into account that we are in a corporate structure and that the illusion of representation is presented to us by the idea that we are represented, and we are not. We're being poisoned on every level: air, water, and food supply. They're even poisoning the very fabric of our clothes with fire retardants and nanoparticles, even in the threads themselves. So we do not have a representative government, and this is why it's so important to go to stopthecrime.net, to the USA Inc. link, and take a look at the documents, but more importantly, understand how you cannot consent and download lawfully yours. Again, some final quotes from the report from Iron Mountain on page 21. Critics frequently object to the icy rationality of the Hudson Institute and RAND Corporation. So for those of you that want to become acquainted with how these incorporated government agencies have been working to bring down the United States and to asset strip the United States and the world, you can take a look at the Hudson Institute and the RAND Corporation. In fact, only recently, the RAND Corporation stated that they would reduce greenhouse gas emissions as close to zero in the 21st century as possible. The RAND Corporation is behind genocide and eugenics, and reducing CO2 emissions would accomplish that desired goal of massive population reduction. On page 78, again, I can't stress the Delphi technique. We've been tricked, we've been fooled, and we have been led into believing that we have input, and we don't. The RAND Corporation also talks about peace games. A manual of this system is being prepared and will be submitted for general distribution among appropriate agencies. Again, this report was contrived in the early 60s, and it was released for publication in 1966 to those in power at the time. And when it was released to President Johnson, he said that this should not get out to the public. When it was released by a whistleblower, the government denied this report and said it was a hoax.
An effective political substitute for war would require alternate enemies. In other words, we have to find an external threat that's essentially very large. It may be, for instance, that gross pollution of the environment can eventually replace the possibility of mass destruction by nuclear weapons as the principal threat to the survival of the species. In other words, they're going to bring the environment up to a point of global threat. Poisoning of the air and of the principal sources of food and water supply is already well advanced, and at first glance would seem promising in this respect. It constitutes a threat that can be dealt with only through social organization and political power. But from present indications, it will be a generation to a generation and a half before environmental pollution will be sufficiently menacing on a global scale to offer a solution as a substitute for war. In other words, we replace the war threat with an environmental threat. Now you know why the environment is on the TVs and the media constantly. A generation is about 30 years, so it'd be about 1991 that this would be brought up to a global scale. It is true that the rate of pollution could be increased selectively for this purpose. In other words, you could selectively find areas where you could deliberately increase the pollution to get this threat in motion a little quicker. It is true that the rate of pollution could be increased selectively. In fact, the mere modification of existing programs for the deterrence of pollution could speed up the process enough to make the threat credible much sooner. In other words, let's have the governments drag their feet on pollution controls or the enforcement of pollution controls. And around the world, that's exactly what we have seen, a matter of foot dragging on the areas. One would then perhaps get the concept that this was all deliberate. Allow pollution to deliberately get worse until it can be manipulated by the controlled media into a world crisis. A global crisis has to be developed.
The greatest land grab in history is going down. And this is now being affected by water. So, what you just watched was a clip from the Iron Mountain documentary. In order to watch the documentary in its full presentation, you can just type in YouTube, the Report from Iron Mountain documentary. Now, it's important to understand what we were told in the Iron Mountain report, that global warming and climate change would be invented by the controllers, the corporate structure, creating pollution, mass pollution. Now, this executive order press release was found September 23rd of 2014. And again, it talks about climate resilient international development. And this was proclaimed by Barack Obama. It says, by the authority invested in me as President of the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, and to safeguard security and economic growth, protect the sustainability and long-term durability of U.S. development, work in vulnerable countries to promote sound decision-making and risk management, is hereby ordered as follows. Just going to read a portion of this because certainly you can find this on our website, Executive Order, Climate Resilient International Development, dated September 23rd of 2014. What this executive order demonstrates is the perpetual deception of the corrupt climate change facade and rewriting of science. This is criminal. This is an executive order by the executive of the United States, Barack Hussein Obama. It says here, the world must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to prevent the most dangerous consequences of climate change. Even with increased efforts to curb these emissions, we must prepare for and adapt to impacts of climate change. The adverse impacts of climate change including sea level rise, increases in temperatures, more frequent extreme precipitation and heat events, more severe droughts, increased wildfire activity, along with other impacts of greenhouse gas emissions, such as ocean acidification, threaten to roll back decades of progress in reducing poverty and improving economic growth in vulnerable countries, compromise the effectiveness and resilience of the United States Department assistance, and degrade security and risk international conflict over resources. This is doublespeak. This is scientific fraudulent disinformation as represented by this executive order. It's followed up with a comment from the environmental leader within the United Nations. And this is very important. This is very interesting. It talks about U.S. Government Accountability Office about drinking water, the EPA program to protect underground sources from injections of fluids associated with oil and gas production needs improvement. So in other words, this particular document is talking about the injection wells, and we're going to be talking about that more fully, because I know many people are unfamiliar with the toxic injection wells that have been stealthily, literally vaccinating the globe. And the EPA has approved 39 states to manage their own programs, which is essentially handing over the repercussions of the toxins from these injection wells now over to the states, while the EPA and the government work together with these injection wells. And I'm going to talk about injection wells in a moment in a little more detail, but I want you to think about what this particular document is saying. Think about what you've just read when you take a look at this document, because the EPA has approved 39 states to manage their own Class 11 programs. Sounds like the EPA is attempting to step aside imminent liability cost for the lack of many years of gross intentional negligence and oversight by turning management of the injection wells over to the states. So, what are injection wells? Well, injection wells have been an invisible dumping site for manufacturing all over the United States for many decades. This speaks exactly to the Iron Mountain report when we were told they would create mass pollution. They have been creating for many decades mass pollution of our groundwater levels intentionally. This is to create the eventual markets that we're seeing now with water treatment plants, and now the conversation about desalinization. This was planned many, many decades ago, and we're seeing the plans roll out, and this is also part of the massive land grab that the Iron Mountain report discussed as well. So, injection wells. For over the past many decades, U.S. industries have injected more than 30 trillion gallons of toxic liquid deep into the earth, using broad expanses of the nation's geology as an invisible dumping ground. There are more than 680,000 underground waste and injection wells nationwide, more than 150,000 which shot industrial fluids thousands of feet below the surface. Scientists and federal regulators acknowledge they do not know how many sites are now leaking. In interviews, several key experts acknowledged that the idea to inject these toxins in the ground as safe was relying on science that has not kept up with reality and on oversight that doesn't always work. And this is a quote from one of the EPA employees. In 10 to 100 years, we are going to find out that most of our groundwater is polluted, said Mario Salazar, an engineer who worked for 25 years as a technical expert with the EPA's underground injection program in Washington, D.C. Washington has been involved in the disinformation of climate change and has been involved with the corporate agencies in poisoning the United States. A lot of people are going to get sick, and a lot of people may die. So for further information on injection wells, you can read the entire article on stopthecrime.net on the Water Wars link. Also important to note that there are over 2,550 injection wells in California alone. Almost 3 billion gallons of oil industry wastewater has been illegally dumped into Central California aquifers that supply drinking water and farming irrigation, according to state documents obtained by the Center for Biological Diversity. The wastewater entered the aquifers through at least 9 injection disposal wells used by oil industry to dispose of water contaminated from fracking fluids and other pollutions. The state's water board confirmed beyond doubt that at least 9 of the wastewater disposal wells have been injecting wells or waste into the aquifers that contain high-quality water that is supposed to be protected under federal and state laws. Just as the Iron Mountain told us they would drag their feet on using protections that would not pollute us to actually pollute us. The Central Valley, the San Joaquin Valley in Central California, has tested over 8 wells, and they are in the vicinity of the injection wells. They have found arsenic, nitrites, and other contaminants that have exceeded maximum contaminant levels for safe level in these water supplies. And California's oil and gas fields produce billions of gallons of contaminated wastewater each year, and much of this contaminated fluid is injected into California and has estimated over 583 wastewater injection wells, of which 1,552 are currently active. Wastewater injection wells are located throughout the state. This is a document that we found. It is a U.S. Geological Survey bulletin, and it was advising the fact that earthquake hazards are associated with deep well injections. And this is a report to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. So what we have now discovered is the perfect earthquake. This document tells us that the perfect earthquake is fingerprintless and deliberate. Think about this. This document tells us that the injection wells cause earthquakes. The maximum profits for using the earth as an invisible internal dump site by injecting toxic wastewater underground. Under certain circumstances, some of the injection sites cause earthquakes. Big profits are made due to the deliberate damage caused by earthquakes and the cost required for reconstruction of the damaged infrastructure, plus the savings by disposing manufacturing chemical waste into the ground versus legal dumping. This is the perfect crime. It's been fingerprintless and it's been intentional to poison our drinking water. Again, this is the discovery that there are a number of military bases that are also responsible for contaminating the groundwater supply. This happens to be some information that we found from a military base, Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino in Southern California. And they have, it's a Superfund site because it was so toxic that the contaminants that were spewing into the groundwater supply are cancer causing. And I would recommend that you take a look at this document as well, again, on stopthecrime.net on the Water Wars link. This is extremely important. Now we're starting to get into the good news. You've heard quite a bit of information that hasn't been so easy to take. But I can tell you that there's quite a bit of good news. This is an extremely important documentary to watch. It is by Colonel Fletcher Prouty, and it's a documentary. You can type it into YouTube and listen to this. It's about 15 minutes long. It's called The Origins of Oil. Colonel Fletcher Prouty, along with other scientific documents, inform us what Rockefeller created with his scientist, the illusion of a finite resource, petroleum. Said that petroleum was created by dinosaurs and plant material. Petroleum does not come from dead dinosaurs. We've all been taught in school that petroleum comes from fossils. And that's why they call it in all of these documents, we must reduce fossil fuels. That's all part of the scientific disinformation. Actually, when you listen to this YouTube, you will learn that petroleum is actually found many, many thousands of feet below the levels of discovered fossils and plant material. In fact, petroleum is a renewable energy resource. The earth provides it in abundance, and it is endlessly supplied to us. But they've created the illusion of peak oil. They have also created the illusion, and this is the good news, of peak water. This illustration demonstrates primary and secondary water cycles. And I would recommend that you go to stopthecrime.net and you go to the primary water link now at the top of the website, primary water leak. You will discover, among many facts, that primary water is constantly being renewed within the mantle of the earth. It takes 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen, which is an atom, and that creates the vapor, which then ultimately turns into water and is brought to the surface through fissures. You can see the mountains being demonstrated here, and you'll see all the little veins. Those are fissures, and this is how the water is released. Important to think about Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islands. Think about what we see. We see a beautiful peak, a rocky peak in the middle of the ocean on one of the islands. And we'll see cascading waterfall coming down this rocky peak with a beautiful swimming pool down at the base. There's no snow, it's not in a valley, and there's not enough consistent rain to keep that waterfall going at the capacity that it is. That is an example of primary water. We are being denied the reality that water is an abundant resource. And now you know. We need you to pass this information on to all that you know. In fact, again, on stopthecrime.net, on the primary water link, you will learn much about primary water, and you'll also learn why the desalinization efforts are going forward as they are. They're poisoning us. We're being poisoned for every market opportunity available. And you've got to think about the desalinization process. There will be saltwater sodium sludge, just as there has been sludge called fluoride that has been reintroduced into our water supply. They believe that the solution to pollution is dilution. No, it's depopulation. They're poisons. They're chemicals. We're being intentionally poisoned, just as the report from Iron Mountain told us. But it's important to understand that we can reach primary water by understanding where we can locate wells. Doesn't mean that they need to be deep wells. And that is the important news, and this is what we need to have all of you share as widely and vastly as you are capable, because this is not a new phenomenon. In fact, there have been many wells drilled in Africa to help some of the deprived villages access water. Some cases they've hit artesian wells where they don't even have to pump the water up out of the ground. It flows out of the ground naturally. In fact, in the Northern California Napa earthquake, known as the Wine Country, here just a few months ago, we have since learned that some of the dry creeks that have been dry for quite some time are now running with water. And they're scratching their heads and wondering where this water's coming from. One of the wells has now turned into an artesian well. It's pumping water up. We're not being told about primary water. We're being told that water is scarce. Now we're going to go into some of the documents that are promoting the lies, just as you have seen some of the documents promoting the lies of climate change and global warming. You need to see the documents that are actually telling each and every single one of us the plans of promoting this disinformation. Of course, we all know here in California we have a drought. We know that it is an engineered drought. We know that the weather is being deliberately manipulated globally, and in fact, that has been the reason for the drought in California. This is all part of the water deception. This is all part of a massive, massive land grab. In fact, they're claiming that as a result of the Napa earthquake in Napa, California, and the drought, that this is causing earthquakes. That because there are well users, people that are pumping water from the ground, that is depleting the groundwater table, and that is causing earthquakes. So what we can see happening now in California is the anger being fomented between those that live in the cities that are on municipal water supplies and those that are living in rural country areas that are on wells. We're being told that wells are mining, exploiting what should be a shared resource. The only exploiting and mining is that of the international incorporated groups that have designed the idea of scarcity. We have an abundant water supply. This is a document that our research team found on the Harvard Kennedy School Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. And back in 2012, they were requesting PhDs and engineers to assist with international global governance rules on how to go forward with rules on managing and controlling the weather. They expressed concern that a rogue nation could upon its own control the weather. And they define geoengineering is the deliberate, large-scale manipulation of the Earth's climate. I cannot think of a better definition than that for what has been created. They know, and we're not supposed to know. Another massive trick, another massive disinformation, moving us into a virtual false reality. Also, it's important to note that the American Bar Association has been in lockstep with this fraud perpetrated upon our country. The American Bar Association, and I would invite everybody to download this. This is a resolution. Again, American Bar Association adopted by the House of Delegates August the 12th, 2003. Resolved that the American Bar Association recognizes that good governance and the rule of law are essential to achieving sustainable development. Further resolved that the American Bar Association reaffirms its 1991 commitment to sustainable development and adopts the internationally accepted concept of sustainable development as recognized at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in 1992 and subsequent international conferences. Simultaneous achievement of environmental protection, economic development, social development, and peace for present and future generations. Again, I recommend you download Lawfully Yours on the homepage of stopthecrime.net. We have been deceived. Our judiciary system is now working for the corporate structure. We do not have a legal system that represents us. We have been deceived. We do not understand how government really works. Another document that we found, and this is extremely important because in the United States and globally, we're all going to be faced with the new takedown of water and land. And in the Harvard School, Law School, they created Water Trust to steal our water. And what they say about the trusts, our water trusts are private, nonprofit organizations that acquire water rights in order to enhance in-stream flow for conservation purposes, recognizing that river habitat and species suffer as a result of the use of water to competitive uses in arid and Mediterranean climates. Again, much of this is doublespeak, but what they're doing is they are creating the idea of water trust. We should look at anything behind water or land trust and replace the word trust with theft. This is, again, doublespeak. This is how we're being tricked and fooled. And they say that they, the Harvard Law firm, are getting their feet wet an introduction to water trusts. Why I bring this up is recently we toured the Northern California Russian River watershed. The Russian River runs along Bohemian Grove. And during the tour, we learned that the next intense effort by Sonoma County is to create water trusts. This is stealing the water from the land so that people will not be able to access the water on their land. Without water, the land is valueless. This is global and regional environmental water issues. And this is water theft by the international bankers. And again, this is just another document that discusses how the goals to steal the water supply through environmental standards are being created and how they're creating the illusion of scarcity. This is a section on water wars. Again, remember the good news, we have an abundant amount of water. They're creating scarcity to create a market, to sell the water back to all of us. And they're polluting the water supply, the groundwater portion, the atmospheric portion of our water system. There's the atmospheric portion, and then there is the water that is created in abundance called primary water. I'm going to be showing you some secret maps, but I first want to talk about Davos, Switzerland, the press release back in January of 2012, where we were told that the water industry was privately reviewing its newest strategy for driving public water resources into private hands at the World Economic Forum. You can download the World Economic Forum. The partnership was quietly launched in October of 2011 with funding from the World Bank, Coca-Cola, Veolia, that's V-E-O-L-I-A, Veolia is Rothschild, and they will report on progress towards its stated mission to transform the water sector and use new normative approaches to water governance as part of the private sector, to put the private sector in the driver's seat of water management. Again, this is a press release out of Davos, Switzerland. You can see that in its entirety on stopthecrime.net. Now, I'm going to name some of the, this is just a partial list of some of the corporate government agencies conspiring to privatize the public water supply. And I'm going to go through this. The World Bank, Rothschild, Goldman Sachs, the World Energy Council, Nestle, Coca-Cola, the Rand Corporation, NASA, the Scripps Institute, NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Bechtel Corporation, EPA, Department of Interior, the USGS, which means United States Geological Survey, the Army Corps of Engineers, Bureau of Reclamation, GE, General Electric, and many others, including Starbucks. I thought I would just tell you that you can see the list on one of the documents we're going to discuss in a moment. These all came out of one of the documents. But before we start the documents, I want to inform you of some secret EPA maps that were discovered by a legislator when he was in Washington, D.C., in a committee meeting. And much to his surprise, at the end of August of 2014, a map was discovered by the EPA, which was released to the U.S. House Committee investigating controversial proposed water regulations that should have the citizens concerned, says Representative Kevin Cramer. It is certainly alarming that the EPA would develop these maps in secret and only release them after being confronted by members of Congress. And the EPA is hiding information, and what they are hiding is their plans to re-identify riparian waterways. Again, this is doublespeak. Most people can't pronounce riparian, and certainly many people have no idea what it means. It means that the EPA, in conjunction with the corporate structure of the United States, is redefining what waterways mean, and they're expanding control over all waterways. That would include seasonal waterways that may only run for 1 or 2 months out of the year. Even a drainage ditch can be considered a waterway. So can a mud puddle. So what we're seeing now is the intention to steal all the land within the United States through corporate agencies. The EPA is incorporated. This is an extremely important document. We're recommending that everyone help us get this document out far and wide. This was found in Oxford, out of Oxford, England. It is the document that discusses exactly how the incorporated agencies are working to take down the public water agencies in the United States and privatize them. In short, this document says many things, but it talks about how the EPA is being used to create environmental standards that the public water agencies in the United States will not be able to comply with and or afford. And this document talks about the other agencies, the Bureau of Land Reclamation and the Department of Interior, all working together to privatize the United States water supply. Now remember, we have primary water, we have an abundance of water, and they are creating water market USA. You can download this document in its entirety and look at this. It is very disturbing. You need to get this out far and wide. You need to see their plans. They have actually identified the agencies working to steal your farms, your ranches, and your properties. This is one of the ways that the Club of Rome decided about 5 years ago that they could centralize global control would be by controlling the water. Water Market USA, which again is a free download from stopthecrime.net. If for any reason you are unable to download any document on stopthecrime.net, you can contact a printing shop that we've made arrangements to be able to print for the cost of printing and shipping, and can forward you any document by contacting area code 707-586-9558. Once again, area code 707-586-9558, and that phone is located in Northern California. This document starts out by saying, Water Market USA is the most ambitious water report yet published by Global Water Intelligence. And it goes on to talk about how the U.S. market has not been perceived as a market, and that they're most excited of the opportunities to make billions and billions of dollars in the water market by privatizing the water supply in the United States. And they go on to talk about how this is the perfect timing because the water companies are being met with endangered species requirements, implementing fish ladders along their water ways, a variety of nonsense based on scientific fraud and corruption of global warming. And they've intentionally neglected the infrastructure of the water system and the supply system in general. They talk about how the infrastructure investment that utility companies have been prepared to delay network rehabilitation. Again, we're converging into a time where we will be forced to accept private-public partnerships, which is how the bankers will get in to our public water municipalities across the United States. This is the document that says how they're going to do it and the agencies that are working with them in doing this. I find it interesting because they also talk about the benefit of the aging municipal workforce, that this will create additional opportunities for privatizing the sector in the future. In other words, there will be employees that are leaving the workforce and younger employees that have been indoctrinated through college, and the belief that global warming is a science will replace those that understand it was all a fraud. Again, they talk about how the EPA has supplied much information that's in this document, has assisted them. They discuss aspects of shifting populations and how water waste systems will have to be built, and the benefit of being able to sell the sludge from the water waste systems, that they'll treat it and they'll sell it back to us. This is already being done in fertilizer that you buy at Home Depot. The CDC EPA whistleblower by the name of David Lewis, Lewis, wrote a book entitled Science for Sale. He talks about sludge as being highly toxic, but they're going to sell it back to us. In this, they also discuss some of the obstacles that they face, that the United States municipalities, the water municipalities, already do a good job of operating their facilities. And another obstacle is the American dream of controlling your own destiny is a powerful driver in the United States. And they talk about how they will remove these obstacles. Again, they talk about the opportunity through the illusion of scarcity and how this has been created, the illusion of scarcity. They say the challenge of water scarcity. Scarcity is the most visible driver of demand for investment in the water sector. Scarcity, the most visible driver for the water market. They go on to tell us how Governor Schwarzenegger's declaration of a drought in California in June of 2008, the water shortages in Atlanta, and the draining of Lake Mead in Nevada, and the spread of the Dust Bowl conditions in the Midwest have all added to the sense of crisis surrounding America's water resources. This is peak water. This is an illusion. This is disinformation. We have primary water. We have more water than we can use, and we need to achieve access to this water. Again, they tell us in this document, scarcity is a function of supply and demand. So I urge all of you to take a look at this document. I'm only covering just a few of the very, very disturbing aspects that are in this document. There's another document, and this is extremely important. Again, you can find this document in its entirety on stopthecrime.net, and it is by Goldman Sachs, and it is entitled Sustainable Growth, Taking a Deep Dive into Water, Global Markets Institute. I would recommend everyone download this, share this far and wide, have meetings within your communities, understand the scam that is being perpetrated on all of us right now. This is absolutely one of the biggest land thefts through the idea of the scarcity of water coming down now very quickly. In this document, it tells us U.S. shale gas development has been aided by the United States' abundant water resources. And then they go in contrast, inadequate water supplies could be a constraint for prospective shale producing countries like China and Mexico. Now understand, Goldman Sachs is marketing the illusion of limited water resources, and they're trying to create a market of investors and conglomerates. So of course they have to talk about the abundant water supply in the United States. This is a way in which to sell off assets within the United States through the illusion that there are limited water supplies, but then saying that the United States has abundant water resources, and then immediately citing China and Mexico as having constricted water resources, which will reduce their market of fracking, shale revolution. This is poisoning our groundwater supply. What is extremely important to note in this document is what we discovered on page 18. Again, this is the Goldman Sachs Sustainable Growth, Taking a Deep Dive into Water document. I would recommend that you read the entire document. But on page 18, they say, opportunities for the water sector. As countries seek to address water challenges, companies in the water sector have seized on the business opportunity to provide solutions. Global water industry, which is estimated to total over $300 billion, includes sectors like desalination, wastewater treatment, and water efficiency technologies. Within the industry, there are companies that focus exclusively on the water sector, such as Veolia in France. Veolia is Rothschild, Veolia, out of France, Rothschild. They cite Maya in Israel, Miya, in Israel, while there are others that are taking part in the business lines in larger conglomerates, for example, General Electric in the United States and Doosan in South Korea, and more. Again, they're talking about seizing the private water and creating water markets. And I listed earlier some of the other perpetrators in these crimes of deception of science. This is talking about rural water resources and the impact of fracking on home values. Understanding that fracking is, as Goldman Sachs tells us, a shale revolution. People are wondering, why are they fracking everywhere now, the beginnings of everywhere in the United States, to poison the groundwater supply? Again, that is the atmospheric level of accessing water. We can go deeper and we can pull up fresh, clean, wonderful drinking water called primary water. And as I understand it, as we access the primary water deep within through the fissures and fractures, that will actually push the polluted water more to the surface. And then we can all become more reliant on the primary water as a drinking water, rather than being indoctrinated into the illusion of where water comes from. It's beyond rain and it's beyond snow. But again, they're talking about the home values declining because of fracking, and there are many areas that are certainly losing tremendous value. Again, this is all part of massive land theft. They talk about in fracking that the water use in the United States for fracking is tremendous. They talk about fracture treatments in coal bed methane wells use 50,000 to 350,000 gallons of water per well, while deeper horizontal shale wells can use anywhere from 2 to 10 million gallons of water to fracture a single well. The extraction of so much water for fracking has raised concerns about ecological impacts to aquatic resources as well as dewatering of drinking water aquifers. It has been estimated that the transportation of 2 to 5 million gallons of fresh water requires 1,400 truck trips. Thus, not only does water used by hydraulic fracking deplete fresh water supplies and impact aquatic habitat, the transportation of so much water also creates localized air quality pollution, safety, and road repair issues. Many functions served by the disinformation of how we can obtain water. This is a very, very disturbing map that we found on the Department of Interior. Pay special attention. This map talks about potential water supply crises and where they will be by 2025. The map talks about the unmet rural water needs and the conflicts that are expected to arise from those unmet rural water needs. And there's color-coded sections in yellow that talk about conflict potential as being moderate. And those that are highlighted in orange are conflict potentials as substantial. And conflict potentials highly likely are in red. Now, this again was provided by the Department of Interior. It's an incorporated agency. It's working for the illusion of limited water resources in conjunction with USA Inc. Now, we discovered On the Owl Foundation website, we discovered this information. They used part of the Department of Energy map, and they illustrated how the conflicts would occur in California, particularly in Sonoma County and Marin County, where we are here, about an hour north of the Golden Gate Bridge. They tell us that Sonoma and Marin counties are clearly identified as having dark yellow status for conflict. The Department of Interior interprets this risk as substantial. In fact, not only is there a substantial risk for conflict, the risk is calculated as being the same as Klamath County. Conflict in Klamath County has already commenced, and people have been shot, and people have been shot at. They go on to tell us that conflict is no joke, and the warning does not come from an overly cautious environmentalist group. The warning comes from one of the most conservative bastions of the Bush administration. The Department of Interior has no qualms about pumping oil in Alaska, but at the same time sees little that some Americans have a high potential to engage in water wars. So we're talking about the anticipation of water conflict by the use of guns. And again, this is provided to us by the Incorporated Department of Interior, all part of the massive water fraud and land grab. Now, the purpose for this slide is to illustrate what we discovered here in Northern California. We discovered, while being on a water tour, that the Russian River, again a river that runs along Bohemian Grove and feeds most of Sonoma County, including Marin, that the Russian River water's primary water ability is received through the Eel River, or the Scotts Valley Dam, which is Lake Pillsbury. Lake Pillsbury is a reservoir. Why am I telling you this? Because we discovered that the headwaters that supply Sonoma County and Marin are owned by PG&E. The water rights were obtained by PG&E in 1930. When you type in PG&E, which stands for Pacific Gas and Electric, followed by Rothschild, you find that Rothschild controls the primary water source, the groundwater source of Sonoma County and Marin. This is important for all of you to find out who has the water rights from your upwater supplies. Now keep in mind, this is only for groundwater. This has nothing to do with primary water that now you know about, and you can contact well drillers, and you can contact people that do grading, and spread this primary water information far and wide. We have plenty of water. We're called the Water Planet, and we discovered a stealth plan by Rothschild to create the increased scarcity. In fact, what we also discovered was that PG&E was seeking to reduce water flow reductions to the Eel River. Now remembering the Eel River is the primary water source to the Russian River, which supplies our groundwater supply. PG&E was seeking in January of 2014 to reduce flow restrictions. They requested that reduced flow with the California, the CPUC, California Public Utility Commission, which is incorporated, not doing business for you, doing business for the corporate structure and creating the illusion of water scarcity. Now, just a comment about Rothschild. I'm going to recommend that you understand what that family has been involved with, and there are certainly other secret families and other banking cartel families involved as well. But again, as I mentioned, PG&E is Rothschild. The Rothschilds have been in control of the world for a very long time, their tentacles reaching into many aspects of our daily lives, as documented in the timeline. You can find this on rense.com, the history of the House of Rothschild. Of course, there are many other resources to discover the tangled web of the Rothschilds' intention for global control, full disregard for morality, ethics, or life itself. This is Jerry Brown's groundwater legislation. Recently was adopted here in California. Again, the Sacramento in California, our state is incorporated. So are all of our local cities and all of our counties. But it's important to note that the legislation was opposed by farm groups of the Central Valley and the lawmakers. And the critics said that the regulations will hurt farmers already strained by sharp reductions that are now not limited in surface water. And they say it's unfortunate that the governor felt compelled to sign this groundwater management scheme that was hastily cobbled together without regard to historical legal precedent and private property water rights. Goes on. You can read this in its entirety again on stopthecrime.net. It is an article from the Sacramento Bee. Jerry Brown in California signs groundwater legislation. Now, keeping in mind, this is all part of the illusion of scarcity, and they're taking the lands away from many of the farms and ranchers in the San Joaquin Valley, the breadbasket of California. This is an example of what you see when you drive through the Central Valley. Now, the Central Valley connects San Francisco with Southern California, and if you drive down Highway 5, you're going to see dozens of signs like this one that says Congress created a Dust Bowl. Sadly, these ranchers have been led into the illusion that we have an operating Congress. We do not. We have a de facto corporate government system, as demonstrated by all of the documents previously discussed. What is specifically important about this particular slide is that in February of 2014, the farmers and ranchers in the Central Valley were cut to zero water by the state and federal water agencies. Sadly, these farmers now rely totally upon groundwater well pumping, which now has been greatly reduced. The availability of pumping with wells is being attacked by the current legislation out of Sacramento. They are shutting the valley down. This is a conservation of water and shows the stages of water reduction requirements in the state of California. The first section that you see in yellow is conditions under Stage 1, voluntary reduction of water. The cream represents Stage 2, which is a mandatory reduction of water. In California, Governor Brown signed us all on to a Stage 2 mandatory drought reduction water consumption, and we're soon likely going to enter into a Stage 3 where we will have to reduce our water consumption 30%, so a full 10% more than we're being required right now to reduce our water consumption. But under a Stage 3 drought, the very bottom line of this chart, you will read prohibited planting of new annual plants, vegetables, flowers, or vines. We will be prohibited in planting produce. Again, cutting the water supply, the food supply through the illusion of scarcity. What is really important about this document, it is a document that we intercepted. This is from the Department of Commerce to Sonoma County. And you can read this document on stopthecrime.net. It says faxed document. It's a difficult document to read because it is faxed, but I'm just going to tell you a couple aspects of this document. Other states throughout the country will likely face the same type of transmittal from the Department of Commerce, remembering that the United States is incorporated, it's doing business. So it's quite appropriate that this letter would have been sent out by the United States Department of Commerce. This is dated August the 26th of 2014. And it's going to Sonoma County Permits and Resource Management Division. The first paragraph of this document is certainly praising Sonoma County's effort in voluntary reduction of water usage. But they're saying it's not enough, that they must do more, that their efforts are just not going to be acceptable by the state, and that the state will come in and impose further restrictions if Sonoma County is not able to further decrease its water reliance. This document also talks about a recent California Superior Court decision, and this was in the Scotts River area. They found that the public trust doctrine has nothing to do with trust. It's all part of the doublespeak. That to protect streams and rivers from harm caused by extracting groundwater for the extraction adversely affects public trust uses. The court found and determined that Siskiyou County, it's a county here in Northern California, up near the Oregon border, that Siskiyou County, as a subdivision of the state, must consider public trust resources when issuing groundwater well drilling permits. They're talking about reducing the issuance of groundwater well drilling permits. Goes on. In fact, the governor of California's draft groundwater considers local groundwater management with state backing to be the optimal regulatory framework for effective groundwater management in California. So they're talking about not issuing groundwater well drilling permits. I would suggest that everyone listening to this YouTube inform all the farmers and ranchers and all the rural residential well owners to pull their well permits now. Because we recently learned, here we are, the 1st of November, we recently learned that just about a week ago in Ventura County, California, they implemented an emergency well drilling moratorium. This is going to end up going across the entire state of California. So we must consider pulling well drilling permits now. They were exempt in the moratorium that has already now been created in Ventura. They have a muzzle on this information. They don't want you to know about it. Now you do. You can type in Ventura County, California, County Board of Supervisors, and you can look at the October 28th meeting. I believe it was the 28th, and you will see that this was on their agenda. Now we are in the process of entering that debate on stopthecrime.net. So you will find that as soon as we have that on our website. But most importantly is the clamp down on our water supply when we have an abundant amount of water. You can slow this YouTube down and you can read some of the quotes that we have out of the Silent Weapons Quiet Wars document. You can also take a look at this Scientific America, where the EPA was criticized for weak oversight of drillers' toxic waste disposal wells. For many of you, that is different than fracking. And this has been intentionally created all over the United States. Again, they're vaccinating our country with poisonous, toxic wells, and they have been burying invisible toxins deep within the earth, and it is now surfacing into our groundwater supplies, creating the need now for the water treatment plants. We have many recommended YouTubes, videos, and movies, and we recommend a number of source documents. Again, you can take a look at this section of this presentation, and we recommend that you do. This is a quick lesson on and through documents why we are having the conversation that we are having right now. And it's illustrated through the documents. Again, you can find more information on stopthecrime.net. But I want to leave everybody with this thought. This is by Chief Arvil Looking Horse, the Lakota Sioux Nation, Cheyenne River Reservation, South Dakota. Quote, "Each of us was put here in this time and this place to personally decide the future of humankind. Did you think you were put here for something less?" So, primary water is our solution. We must get this information out far and wide. Please go to stopthecrime.net, to the Water Wars link and the Primary Waters link, and share this far and wide. This is Deborah Tavares reporting for stopthecrime.net. Thank you.